I want to challenge you to do something different for the next few minutes. Stop trying to manifest anything. Instead, observe how your body tightens when you think about something you don't yet have. That contraction is the control loop. If you can locate where that tension begins, right there, you can dissolve the input that feeds scarcity and expand into effortless receiving. Ready to test it? Mapping the invisible scarcity loop. You ever notice how some people can work themselves into the ground and still feel like they're falling behind? They upgrade their skills, stay late, plan every move, and still end the day with that strange sense of something's missing. That feeling doesn't show up because the world is unfair. It shows up because there's a quiet system running, something most people never realize they've programmed themselves to follow. It's not about money, talent, or timing. It's about the invisible filter that determines what kind of reality you're even capable of perceiving. Scarcity isn't an external shortage. It's an inner operating system built around a single instruction: only trust life when it behaves according to your plan. That conditional trust looks harmless at first. It sounds like responsibility, discipline, maybe even wisdom. I'll relax when I finally have enough saved. I'll feel confident when I get that job. I'll open up when I'm sure they won't leave. Every statement sounds reasonable, but each one runs on the same flawed code. Trust only when you see proof first. The problem is, reality doesn't work in that order. Think of it like software that takes your emotional input and runs it through an old script. Conditional trust goes in, the process kicks up control and anxiety, and out comes the result: another round of confirmation that you're not there yet. Conditional trust leads to exhausting control, and that loops back into the output of lack. Then your mind looks at that output, says, "See? It never works out," and stores that as more evidence. You don't even realize you're feeding your own data back into the program that wrote it. Most people can recognize it in small moments. You check your phone looking for a message, don't see one, and instantly feel hollow, convinced something's wrong. Then, an hour later, a message arrives, but there's no relief, just a quick flush of "finally" before the loop resets. You trained your emotions to follow conditions, not presence. Another example, someone trying to build a new career keeps waiting for proof. They're on the right path, but their doubt clouds their perception so much that they miss the positive signs entirely. The system can't show abundance when the input's coded for lack. Your brain is wired to keep its systems consistent, even when those systems don't serve you anymore. It's like an emotional thermostat. Say you're used to living at a steady level of doubt. The moment your trust rises above that familiar zone, your senses start scanning for threats. You'll see delays, missteps, or mistakes as warnings, because the mind would rather return to its known temperature than risk uncertainty. That's the scarcity loop trying to self-correct back to safe. It's not malicious, it's mechanical. There's always a story behind the system. Someone may grow up believing that love has to be earned, so they work overtime on every connection, proving their worth, managing impressions, predicting reactions. It's exhausting, but they can't stop because at some level, they've linked control with safety. Or maybe a person has been through unpredictable finances for years, so they hold on to every penny with a clenched fist. Even when more income arrives, they can't relax into it. The signal of scarcity lives in their body long after the conditions have changed. And this is the twist. That feeling of being stuck isn't random. It's designed. Every "I need to know before I can trust" moment is the system protecting its own stability. But once you see it that way, you stop trying to fix surface problems and start debugging the mechanism itself. You start noticing where conditional trust sneaks in. That moment before you send the message, that hesitation before you apply, that tension before you let yourself enjoy what's already working. Those are not failures, they're system alerts. So if this is a loop, then the obvious question becomes, what happens when you interrupt the input itself? What happens when the first signal, the one that says, "I'll trust when I see proof," gets flipped into, "I trust as the proof forms"? Because at that point, control has nothing left to feed on. The loop can't keep running without fuel. The system begins to rewrite itself, and that's where abundance stops being abstract and becomes something you actually experience in real time. The feedback loop that breeds lack. You ever wonder why sometimes the harder you try, the worse things seem to get? You push, plan, organize every detail, but instead of relief, you end up even more anxious. That's because effort built on fear doesn't create progress. It broadcasts desperation. The energy that's meant to move you forward ends up looping back, amplifying the same scarcity you're trying to outrun. It's not laziness or lack of skill. It's that the system's still tuned to the wrong signal. Control often looks like discipline from the outside, but underneath it's usually an emotional defense system. It's the mind's way of protecting you from uncertainty, of keeping life predictable. You build routines, set alarms, double-check everything. But each measure is really saying, "I don't trust this will work unless I handle it myself." The paradox is that every time you tighten your grip, you remind your nervous system that letting go isn't safe. So now control feels necessary, even though it keeps you in the same loop you're trying to escape. It's a bit like pulling on a rope that's supposed to guide you forward. The gentle hold moves you easily, but the moment you panic and start yanking, it tightens. The harder you pull, the more it grips your hand, and suddenly you're not moving. You're tangled. That's what emotional control does. It's meant to help you steer life, but over time, it just proves to you that flow can't be trusted. You stop cooperating with the current and start fighting it. From a brain standpoint, this isn't random. Your mind predicts the future based on what it's already seen. If you've spent years expecting disappointment, it will project that forward. It will scan for danger long before opportunity. You don't consciously decide that. It's a process running in the background. Neuroscientists call it predictive processing, but you experience it as self-fulfilling prophecy. The brain rehearses lack, and the emotional body plays along. It's reinforced by the way perception works. Confirmation bias keeps you looking for data that fits your expectations. If you believe life is hard, you notice every delay and overlook every ease. Emotional homeostasis keeps you feeling what's most familiar, even if it's uncomfortable. So when hope rises, your body quietly corrects back to doubt, the same way a thermostat drags the temperature back to its setting. You think you're starting fresh, but you're replaying a memory disguised as today. There's a story that plays out all the time, and maybe parts of it will sound familiar. A young professional bends over backward at work, always first in, last out, desperate to prove their worth. Every project must be perfect, every email triple-checked. But no matter how much praise they get, they can't feel secure. Inside, they're still trying to earn permission to relax. The more they chase that sense of validation, the further it slips, and life mirrors them beautifully. New boss, new company, same dynamic. Each experience quietly repeats, you still have to prove yourself. That invisible pattern has a price. The energy it takes to constantly control outcomes drains vitality. Your body runs in alert mode, even when you're sitting still. Sleep doesn't refresh you because the mind never stops managing tomorrow. Over time, it disconnects you from your natural timing. You stop noticing signals, when to rest, when to move, when something's ready. Your intuition is still working, but the noise of control drowns it out. The system keeps replaying because you haven't yet recognized that the exhaustion is the feedback. And that's the key shift. When you stop labeling these cycles as failure and start reading them as information, the loop becomes useful. The frustration shows you precisely where the system runs strongest. The fatigue shows you where trust has been replaced by vigilance. The lack of flow isn't punishment, it's instruction. It tells you, you're pushing where you should be allowing. Once you interpret it that way, every trigger starts guiding you instead of blocking you. It's strangely freeing when you realize that control wasn't wrong. It was just overused. It was meant to protect you until trust felt safe again. Seeing the feedback as a map out of limitation means you no longer have to attack the problem. You can adjust the input, and that question, where do you place trust before proof, becomes the single leverage point that can start collapsing the entire scarcity system. Because from that moment, effort stops fighting against life and starts working with it. Flipping the input, how trust rewrites the system. Here's where most people miss it. Abundance isn't something you chase, earn, or build up through harder work. It's something you allow. The real shift happens right at the input. When conditional trust turns into unconditional trust, the scarcity loop runs out of energy. The output starts updating itself because you've stopped feeding the system that kept regenerating lack. It's less about changing your outer world and more about rewiring how your inner signals get read. Of course, unconditional trust sounds easy when life is stable, but when outcomes blur and timing feels uncertain, the mind wants to see proof first. It wants contracts before commitment, results before belief, comfort before release. That's why trust feels like a leap. It pushes against the brain's impulse to measure risk before every move. The old program demands evidence before comfort, yet abundance reverses that equation. It asks you to feel safe before seeing why. The brain hates that order, but the flow of life depends on it. It helps to think about it like flying. When turbulence hits, the instinct is to grip harder, fix your eyes on the wings, and manage every twitch of the plane. But there's an autopilot built for stability that can navigate the movement with far more precision than human control ever could. Letting go and switching to that mode feels deeply uncomfortable at first, because you're surrendering decision-making to a system you can't consciously monitor. Yet, the moment you allow it, the flight steadies. Trusting life works in exactly that way. When you release manual control, your energy stops translating turbulence into danger and starts reading it as correction. You can tell when you've slipped back into manual mode because your body gives you signals. Notice when your shoulders tighten or your breath gets shallow. That contraction isn't proof that something's wrong. It's an indicator that the old scarcity system has reactivated. The rush of urgency that says, "Fix this now," is just code running a familiar pattern. Instead of fighting it, watch it. Give space to the discomfort without feeding it with action. Each time you pause before reacting, you teach the body that trust doesn't mean recklessness. It means allowing stability to reestablish itself without interference. Systems theory shows that a small change in a high leverage point can transform an entire structure. In this case, that leverage point is trust. You don't have to overhaul your habits or rewrite your entire story. You only need to change where the system takes its first cue from. Shift the input from proof-seeking to trusting, and the feedback starts aligning automatically. You might not notice it immediately, because the old loop will still test you with delays or mixed signals. But instead of reading these glitches as blocks, you begin to see them as recalibrations, proof that the output really is updating. An example of this shift can be subtle, but powerful. Think of someone who's been in financial uncertainty for months. They apply for opportunities, chase clients, and nothing seems to click. One week, they stop forcing outcomes. They start focusing on being of service, follow their intuition, reach out only when the timing feels light rather than pressured. Within days, a new contact reaches out, or an unpaid invoice clears. It's not magic, it's perception. When trust opens, the brain relaxes enough to notice timing that was always there, but filtered out by doubt. Here's the part that often surprises people. Surrender isn't passive. It isn't about waiting for luck to choose you. It's about recalibrating your internal signal so you can receive data from possibility instead of fear. You're not standing still. You're syncing with openness. In that space, your actions become sharper, more inspired, because they're no longer running through the filter of panic. The scarcity program loses authority once you stop trying to prove it wrong. When trust becomes the default input, scarcity stops being real data. It can appear as memory, but it no longer generates new outcomes. The system dissolves into one that favors flow, timing, and expansion. You begin noticing coincidences stacking in your favor, conversations arriving at the right hour, people responding with ease instead of resistance. The output of abundance isn't created through effort, it's revealed through alignment. And once that happens, something subtle shifts. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to fix broken parts and start recognizing you've been a system calibrated for expansion all along. The myth of lack starts falling away, not because it failed, but because it fulfilled its original purpose. It led you back to the source input where trust lives, quietly waiting to be turned on. Abundance isn't something that drops into your life from the outside. It shows up when you stop fighting what is and start syncing with it. When your thoughts, emotions, and choices stop arguing with reality, you begin to notice flow replacing effort. You know what's wild? The less you chase, the more life meets you halfway. That's the real call, not to push harder, but to trust deeper. When you stop asking, when will it happen, and start feeling it's already forming, something unlocks. Your system quiets, and what you wanted starts unfolding, naturally drawn to your new frequency.